Echu was a hunter of great skill, known among his people for his steady hand and keen eyes. The dense forests of his homeland whispered with stories of his victories, his arrows swift as the wind. Yet, for all his strength, he found himself powerless against the force that now held him captive: love. Makala was the daughter of a chieftain from a neighboring tribe, a people with whom Echu's own had long been at odds. Their disputes were old, tangled in matters of land, pride, and blood. Yet when he first saw her, standing at the river's edge, her dark hair catching the dying light of the sun, those feuds seemed like distant echoes. She did not belong to his world of spears and duty. She was laughter carried on the breeze, the hush of dawn before the first bird's call. They met in secret, drawn together by something neither could name, something deeper than tradition or fear. At dusk, when the shadows stretched long and the village fires crackled in the distance, they would find each other beneath the great banyan tree, its roots weaving into the earth like the fate they wished to escape. Makala would bring him woven garlands, their fragrance lingering on his skin long after they parted. He would carve small trinkets from wood, slipping them into her hands before she disappeared into the night. Yet love, no matter how fierce, does not erase the past. Rumors grew like vines, creeping through the villages. A stolen glance here, a whispered name there. It was not long before Makala's father summoned her, his face a mask of iron. There was no mercy in his voice when he declared that she would wed another, a warrior of their tribe, a man of standing. Her protests were swallowed by the weight of duty. Echu, upon hearing the news, felt his world tilt. He could not, lose her. That night, he braved the path to her village, slipping past the guards like mist through trees. Makala awaited him, eyes glistening in the moonlight. He reached for her, hands warm despite the cold. "Run with me," he whispered. She hesitated, her breath unsteady. "Where will we go? There is nowhere safe." "Let the world be against us," he said. "Only say you will come." A single nod was all it took. Their fates entwined in that moment, a promise sealed beneath the stars. They were to leave before the first light, before the world could wake and pull them apart. But fate is often crueler than men. The warriors of her tribe had been watching, waiting. As they fled into the forest, the night erupted with shouts. Spears gleamed in the moonlight, feet pounded against the earth. Echu fought, his blade a streak of silver, his heart thundering. But they were too many. A blow struck his side, pain lancing through him like fire. He fell, the world spinning, the scent of blood thick in the air. He saw Makala struggle, saw the fear in her eyes as rough hands dragged her away. He tried to rise, to call her name, but darkness swallowed him before he could make a sound. When he awoke, the sun was already high, its warmth a cruel contrast to the cold emptiness in his chest. His wounds ached, but it was nothing compared to the fear clawing at his heart. He stumbled through the forest, each step a battle, each breath a prayer. He reached her village by nightfall, desperation driving him forward. But he was too late. Makala was gone. Grief came like a storm, fierce and unrelenting. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of how she had refused her fate, how she had chosen death over a life without him. The river had taken her, they said, its depths swallowing her sorrow whole. Echu stood at the water's edge, the wind cold against his skin. He could not believe it. She had been here, warm, alive, her laughter lingering in the air. And now she was nothing but a name on their lips, a story to be told in whispers. The river ran dark, endless. Somewhere beyond its reach, she was waiting. He could feel it. He would not leave her alone. The river stretched before him, dark and endless, its currents whispering secrets to the night. Echu stood at its edge, his breath shallow, his heart a hollow drum within his chest. Makala was gone, but he refused to believe she was beyond his reach. Death had taken her, but he would follow. The village shaman found him there at dawn, his silhouette rigid against the breaking light. The old man's gaze, filled with the weight of ages, took in the grief that clung to the young warrior like a second skin. He did not speak at first. He only watched as Echu knelt, fingers trailing through the river's surface as if it might still carry the warmth of her touch. "She is beyond this world," the shaman finally said, his voice like the rustling of old leaves. "The dead do not return." Echu turned to him, his jaw set, his eyes burning with the kind of resolve that bends the will of gods. "Then I will go to her." A sigh, heavy as the mountains, escaped the old man's lips. "There is a way, but it is not meant for the living." "I do not care." The shaman studied him for a long moment before nodding. That night, beneath the ancient banyan tree, where Echu and Makala had once whispered their love, the ritual began. The shaman drew symbols into the earth, his voice a low murmur that wove through the air like the threads of an unseen tapestry. Smoke curled from the burning herbs, thick and fragrant, making the world tremble at its edges. Echu drank the bitter draught placed in his hands. The ground shifted beneath him, the earth yawning wide, and suddenly he was falling, swallowed by a darkness deeper than night. When he opened his eyes, the world had changed. The forest was the same yet different, its trees taller, its shadows alive, watching. The air was thick, humming with a presence unseen. He knew where he was. He had crossed the threshold into the afterlife. The path stretched before him, winding into mist. He walked, the silence pressing against his ears, his pulse a steady drumbeat in the stillness. Then came the river, not the one he had known, but something older, its waters black and sluggish. A lone figure sat at its bank, eyes like dying embers. "You seek the dead," the boatman rasped, his voice dry as brittle leaves. "I seek Makala," Echu answered. The boatman studied him before nodding toward the waters. "Cross, if you can bear their weight." Echu stepped forward, and the river surged. Faces rose from the depths, their voices weaving into a chorus of sorrow. Hands, pale and thin, reached for him, grasping at his limbs, his soul. Whispers coiled around him, some pleading, some cursing. He clenched his jaw and pressed forward. The water grew heavier, the weight of grief pressing into his bones, tried to drag him down. But he thought of Makala, of her laughter, of the promise in her eyes that night beneath the banyan tree. He would not falter. With a final step, he reached the other side, collapsing onto the bank. The boatman nodded once, approving, and faded into mist. Echu rose, his body aching, and walked deeper into the afterlife. The path twisted, leading him into a vast expanse where shadows roamed. Creatures with hollow eyes and sharp smiles lurked in the gloom, their movements sinuous and slow. They fed on fear, on hesitation. Echu gripped the knife at his side, but he knew steel would not help him here. They would not attack unless he gave them reason. He took a breath, steadying himself, and walked forward, unflinching. The shadows whispered, hissed, but they did not touch him. At last, he reached the gates. A towering figure stood before them, its eyes like molten gold, its presence vast and knowing. "You would defy the order of life and death," the gatekeeper intoned. "I would reclaim what was taken from me." The gatekeeper studied him for a long moment. Then, a single question: "What is love to you?" Echu did not hesitate. "It is the promise that even death cannot break." The silence stretched, the air thick with unseen power. Then the gatekeeper stepped aside. Beyond the gates lay a world suspended in twilight, the land of the dead. He had made it through. But finding Makala would be another battle entirely. The land of the dead stretched before him, a vast expanse where the sky never changed, neither light nor dark, but a muted silver caught between time. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the whispers of unseen spirits drifting like forgotten echoes. Echu moved forward, his breath steady, but his heart a tempest. Makala was here, somewhere beyond the mist, beyond the veil that separated their worlds. He had come too far to lose her now. Through the shifting haze, figures loomed, souls wandering in a realm where neither sorrow nor joy could take root. Some turned to watch him, their faces blurred by memory's decay, but none barred his path. They had long since accepted their fate. He had not. Then he saw her. She stood beneath a towering tree, its branches white and barren, its roots digging deep into the nothingness below. Makalah's form was untouched by time, her dark hair flowing like ink, her eyes reflecting a sorrow deeper than the river that had taken her. She did not move as he approached, but her lips parted in a breathless whisper. "You came." Echu stopped, the sight of her stealing the air from his lungs. For a moment, there was no afterlife, no impossible journey, only her standing before him, as if the world had rewound itself to the night they had last touched. "I swore I would find you," he said, voice hoarse. She lifted a trembling hand, hesitating, as if afraid he would vanish like a dream. He took the final step and clasped her fingers in his, warmth blooming between them, defying the cold grip of death itself. She let out a soft, broken laugh, disbelieving. He held her tighter, anchoring himself. But something in her gaze shifted. A shadow, not of fear, but of understanding. "You don't belong here. I belong where you are," he said. She shook her head, sorrow threading through her expression. "The dead cannot return, Echu, and the living cannot stay." The words struck deep, but he had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, in the depths of his heart, that this path could not lead to the life they once dreamed of. Even so, he would not let go. "I won't leave you again." Makalah's eyes softened, though tears never came in this realm. "You never left me." She placed a hand against his chest, feeling the heartbeat that did not belong in this world. "You carry me still." A presence stirred behind them, vast and ancient. The gatekeeper had returned, its golden eyes unblinking, waiting. "There is a choice," the voice rumbled, a sound that carried the weight of the universe. "To remain is to surrender your soul. To return is to live, but only one may walk the path of the living." Echu did not hesitate. "Then let her go back." Makalah's fingers tightened around his, panic flashing in her expression. "No, I'm already lost. You must go." But he had made his decision. What was a life without her? A shell, an echo, a story half told. The gatekeeper raised a hand, power crackling in the air, the very fabric of existence bending to its will. But before the choice could be sealed, Makalah wrenched free, stepping between them. "I will not take his place," she said fiercely. "I will not let him trade his life for a memory." She turned to Echu, her gaze searching, desperate. "You must live. You must carry us forward." He opened his mouth to argue, but she reached up, cupping his face with the tenderness of 1,000 unspoken moments. "If you love me, you will live." The words shattered him more than any blade ever could, but he saw the truth in them. Love was not just holding on, it was knowing when to let go. Slowly, painfully, he nodded. Makalah smiled, something soft and aching, and stepped back. The wind stirred, and the realm around them began to fade. The last thing he saw was her eyes, luminous and eternal. Then he woke. The forest loomed above him, sunlight filtering through the leaves, warm and golden. The world smelled of earth and life. His body ached, his heart ached more. But he was alive, and in the whisper of the wind, in the rustling of the trees, he heard her. She was with him, always.